few days ago, I had a conversation with my wife of 11 years, and, unsurprisingly, it ended with her in tears. It reminded me of another difficult moment from 3 years back when I was on the verge of losing my job. At that time, Emma, who also goes by Emily, was furious at the thought of me missing our anniversary. She demanded that I come home, no excuses. Funny how things change, though. Now, it's her who won't be around for our anniversary, and I didn't bother trying to convince her otherwise. Still, I can't deny that the last 12 years have been the best of my life. When I first met Emma, she was 24, just getting started in sales. She came to our architectural firm, trying to sell us on advertising in some high-end magazines, which we definitely couldn't afford at the time. In the crowd of people, I couldn't help but notice her, a striking woman with jet black hair. After discussing the proposal with my business partner, he gave me the nudge I needed to catch her attention long enough to ask her out. It worked. On our first date, she admitted she knew from the start that we couldn't afford her services, but that didn't stop me from falling head over heels for her. 6 months into our relationship, she moved in with me as she transitioned from her scattered, nomadic lifestyle to a more settled office job. 4 months later, we got married. Every day since, I've felt like the luckiest man alive for convincing her to say yes. With urgency buzzing in my chest, I picked up the phone to call my boss again. I've been with the company since its early days. Back when Ethan started the firm, it was just 4 of us designers, but we made a name for ourselves by cutting production times across different industries. "Come on, Ethan, pick up," I muttered into the phone, waiting impatiently. Finally, I heard his voice. "Luke, I'm swamped right now." "What's up?" he said in his usual brisk tone. Keeping it short, I responded, "I'm heading out now. I won't be back until Monday." "Leaving? Where are you off to?" Ethan asked, sounding puzzled. "I'm going to celebrate my anniversary with Emma. I'll be back on Monday." "Well, have a good trip, and don't forget to knock before coming back," he quipped with a grin in his voice. I couldn't help but laugh. "You always know how to crack me up, Ethan," I said. He shot back, "Yeah, I get that a lot. Not from people who actually know me, though." I sighed. "Sorry, things have been rough at home since Emma got this new boss. There's been a lot of tension, and I'm hoping a weekend at the hotel will help smooth things over." Ethan, ever the joker, replied, "Well, it can't hurt. Just don't forget me when you're out seeking some adventure." "Deal. See you Monday," I said, but before hanging up, I asked his secretary, Lila, for a favor. Lila was a magician at sorting things out, and I needed her help getting a flight. After a quick conversation, I started packing my bag. As I was folding the last of my clothes, the phone rang again. It was Lila. "You've got 45 minutes to get through security at the airport. Your ticket's waiting at the counter," she said, adding that she'd booked my return flight for Sunday at 1:30 p.m. perfect. Now all I had to do was get there in time. Unfortunately, Emma couldn't book a room at her original hotel, so she ended up reserving one a couple of blocks away. "Have a safe trip. See you on Monday," Lila said. Hearing that, I scrambled to the bathroom, grabbed my shaving kit, and shoved it into my bag. I did a quick sweep of the room, even remembering to switch off the coffee maker, something I rarely do. Then, I rushed out the door and headed straight to my car. After 15 years of driving these roads, I'd found a few shortcuts that always saved me time, and I was determined to use every one of them today. Even though I was speeding, I made it to the airport with time to spare. After going through check-in, security, and boarding, I settled into my seat on the plane. I pulled out my headphones and put on some music, hoping it would calm my nerves. Flying always makes me jittery, but music tends to help me unwind. 3 hours into the flight, I drifted off, which wasn't surprising considering the lack of sleep I'd been dealing with lately. Work stress was partly to blame, but if I'm being honest, the tension between Emma and me had also been keeping me up at night. We'd been going through a rough patch for a few months, and for over 2 of those months, she had been distant, almost like she was shutting me out. It all started when she told me about a promotion at work. Some guy from another department, Jake Miller, had been brought in to take over her team. Emma had been furious, determined to prove he wasn't fit for the role. For the first couple of weeks, she came home utterly drained, constantly plotting ways to outshine him. But after a while, her attitude shifted. She stopped talking about beating him and started mentioning how they were cooperating to land a major client. Naturally, My mind wandered, and I couldn't shake the thought that maybe there was something more going on between them. I asked her about it a few times, but she always reassured me that there was nothing to worry about. As I took my bag from the overhead compartment, I thought about how I could surprise Emma with dinner. I didn't want to give anything away. After landing, I grabbed a cab to my hotel and made small talk with the driver. During the ride, he mentioned a cozy, dimly lit restaurant located between Emma's hotel and mine. It sounded perfect, just the type of place I had in mind for a quiet evening with her. I made a mental note to check it out. Once I arrived at the hotel, I checked in, took a quick shower, and hurried out the door. I wanted to catch Emma before she headed off to dinner. The clock in the lobby read 5:30, so I figured I still had some time. The streets were lively, but it was an easy walk to Emma's hotel. As I followed the receptionist's directions, I kept an eye out for the restaurant the cab driver had recommended. Sure enough, it was right there, a few steps from her hotel, exactly as described. Feeling good about my plan, I tipped the cab driver generously before I started walking. At around 5:50, I entered the hotel lobby and joined the line at the reception desk. As I waited, a receptionist caught my eye and gestured for me to step forward. "Hello," I greeted her with a smile. "My name's Luke Harding. I'm hoping to find out if my wife, Emily Harding, is in her room right now. I'd really appreciate the chance to speak with her if she's available." "Emily Harding?" she asked, double-checking before flipping through her notes. "Yes, she's a guest here. Let me see if she's in her room." She dialed the number, and after a few moments, she looked up at me with a polite, apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, sir." There was no answer. "Would you like to leave her a message?" she offered. "Not right now," I replied, trying to hide the disappointment creeping into my voice. I was hoping to surprise her. "It's our anniversary tomorrow, and I'd be grateful if you didn't mention that I was here," I added with a hopeful smile. "Of course, sir. I won't say a word," she reassured me, though I was barely listening at that point, too distracted by the sinking feeling that Emma wasn't around. "I hope you have a wonderful day tomorrow," she added politely. "Thanks. I'm planning on going to a restaurant later, so maybe I'll get lucky and catch her," I said, forcing a smile. "Good night." I walked away from the desk, heading toward the far end of the lobby, where a noisy crowd had gathered. People were bustling around, working, eating, and chatting, filling the space with energy. It was packed, and I knew that trying to spot Emma in the chaos would be like finding a needle in a haystack. Still, I glanced around, hoping against hope. I noticed a restroom off to the side, near the back wall, and decided to duck in quickly. When I came out, I paused near the entrance of the corridor, scanning the room again, but it felt hopeless. The sea of people made it nearly impossible to pick out anyone in particular. I was about to give up when I heard a faint burst of laughter, one that sounded eerily like Emma's. My heart raced as I followed the sound, my eyes trailing along the wall where towering booths blocked most of my view. I could only catch glimpses of faces, mostly men and women sitting closely together, deep in conversation. I hesitated, unsure if I should approach. I didn't want to embarrass myself or alert Emma if it really was her. So instead, I pulled back, retracing my steps as I kept my gaze fixed on the wall, hoping for another clue that she was near. But for now, I was left in limbo, wondering if I had imagined it. I slowly made my way along the row of tables, one by one, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach with each step. When I reached the third booth from the corridor, I saw her. Emma sat there, engrossed in conversation with a man I didn't recognize. She looked absolutely radiant, dressed in the same elegant dress she always wore on special evenings, those nights when dancing was involved. Their body language was casual, too comfortable for just a professional dinner. My heart pounded as a flood of thoughts rushed through my mind, questioning what was really going on between them. This was no mere colleague interaction. It seemed far more intimate. As he leaned in closer, I instinctively grabbed onto the doorframe to steady myself. And then it happened. She bent toward him, and their lips met in a gentle, unmistakable kiss. It felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. With a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me, I quietly stepped away from the doorway and made my way to the center of the hall, sinking into one of the padded chairs with a high backrest. Time seemed to stand still as I stared at their table, unable to tear my eyes away. Suddenly, Her laughter rang out again, breaking through the noise of the crowd. My head snapped in their direction, and I saw her walking beside him, her hands wrapped tightly around his. They walked with an undeniable closeness, as if they were in their own little world, completely unaware of everyone around them, including me. They passed just 15 feet away, and though they spoke softly to each other, all I could focus on was the adoring look on her face as she gazed at him. It had been so long since I'd seen that expression, one filled with admiration and affection. The kind of look she hadn't given me in ages. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I felt frozen, my breath catching in my throat. I forced myself to move, heading for the exit with my mind racing and my face likely betraying my inner turmoil. There was no mistaking what I'd just witnessed, and my determination grew with every step. Once I hit the sidewalk, I couldn't help but glance back. Emma clung to his arm, leaning into him with a kind of affection I hadn't seen in a long time. They strolled down the street, their figures shrinking in the distance until they turned the corner. I realized they had gone into the same restaurant I'd noticed earlier. Snapping out of my daze, I instinctively headed for the door, but then I paused. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to slow down, giving them time to get settled inside, while I tried to decide what to do next. I stopped in my tracks, taking a few deep breaths to steady myself. There was no denying the emotions I had just witnessed on their faces, but somehow, I needed more. I didn't fully understand why I wanted to see more. It was almost like I was torturing myself, but I couldn't stop. Mustering up what little resolve I had left, I pushed open the restaurant door and slipped inside, hugging the walls as I moved. The entrance was empty, and no one seemed to notice me come in. I stayed near the shadows, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the dim lighting. As I scanned the room, my gaze eventually locked onto them, sitting at a small, intimate table for two at the far end. My heart sank, but I forced myself to move. I kept my hands against the walls, almost like I needed to hold on to something solid, as I made my way toward a small table of my own nearby. I hadn't even settled into my seat when the waitress appeared behind me. "What can I get for you, dear?" "What'll it be?" she asked with a casual warmth that felt completely out of sync with the storm inside me. "Double scotch on the rocks," I muttered, barely able to make eye contact. As I waited, I overheard their conversation, my ears honing in on their every word. "Our meeting tomorrow isn't until 10 a.m., so we can celebrate as late as we want tonight," he said to Emma in a low, intimate tone. "I'm so glad you didn't let him guilt-trip you into going home," he added. "We wouldn't miss our 2-month anniversary for anything." Emma smiled and replied, "I can't believe it's already been 2 months. It could have been longer," he murmured, "if you just accepted my offer that first week." She chuckled softly. "I had to play the innocent wife for a bit, remember? After all, I'm supposedly married." She shook her head as if amused by the charade. He joined in the laughter, adding, "I still can't believe I asked you out in front of Sue, knowing full well about your situation." "Sue actually told me you had a thing for me," Emma said, leaning closer. "We should do something nice for her. She practically brought us together." As if on cue, the waitress returned to their table, serving their drinks before disappearing just as quickly. Emma and the man raised their glasses, toasting to the 2 months they'd shared and the many more to come. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice dripping with certainty as their glasses clinked together. "There will be many more," Emma replied with a cheerfulness that twisted the knife even deeper. Moments later, the waitress reappeared at my table, setting my drink down in front of me. "Here you go, dear." "Is that all?" she asked, her smile as bright as ever. I nodded stiffly, barely able to speak, and stared at the glass in front of me, trying to make sense of the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. I handed the waitress a $10 bill and said, "Thank you, ma'am," before shifting my focus back to Emma and her companion. They glanced my way briefly, but to them, I was just another stranger, someone inconsequential. When Emma noticed his attention wandering, she followed his gaze and locked eyes with me. Her face was priceless, a mix of shock and guilt. "You know," I said, my voice steady but laced with sarcasm, "a guy should always carry a camera for moments like these." Her lips moved, but no words came out. I could tell she was scrambling for something to say, but nothing came. Wow, 2 months, huh? I continued, not letting her off the hook. A real milestone. I remember when anniversaries used to mean something. After 11 years, though, the novelty tends to wear off. I watched them squirm, both visibly uncomfortable, but I didn't stop. Let's celebrate this 2-month special occasion, shall we? It's a symbol of passion and prosperity, right? I smiled, but it was bitter. A lovely couple like you deserves a gift. So, here's mine, I said, and with that, I tossed my wedding ring in Emma's direction. It landed on the table with a soft clink. Before Emma could say anything, the guy, Jake, I assumed, blurted out in panic, clearly realizing things were about to get ugly. Emma tried to calm him down, but I wasn't interested in their little act anymore. Tell him how lucky he is that he didn't end up in my house, I said to her coldly. Make sure to contact me when you've figured out where you want your things delivered. If you're smart, you'll avoid coming to my place in person. I started to leave, but added one more jab, and you might want to put some ice on his nose. It'll help with the swelling. With that, I turned and walked out of the restaurant, my mind already made up. I marched down the street, heading back to my hotel with a sense of finality. There was no way Emma knew where I was staying now, and after what had just happened, I doubted she'd be in any rush to find me. As soon as I reached the hotel lobby, I approached the front desk and asked, "Excuse me, do you have the contact information for the airlines? I need to book a flight immediately." "Of course, sir," the receptionist replied politely. "Do you have a preferred airline, and when would you like to depart?" I gave her all the details, destination, time, everything. She assured me she'd call up to my room once she had the information. Back in my room, I paced back and forth, my thoughts racing, trying to process everything that had just gone down. How had it all come to this? How could this have happened? The question ran circles in my mind, and suddenly a thought hit me. Maybe Emma had missed her true calling. She could have been an actress with how flawlessly she'd played her part these last few months. Just thinking about it made my frustration spike. I couldn't stand being cooped up in that room anymore. Without another second to lose, I grabbed my bag, threw it over my shoulder, and hurried down the stairs to the lobby. When I got there, the receptionist had just finished a call and waved me over. "Sir, if you leave now, you might make the last flight of the day. Registration closes in 30 minutes. If you miss it, the next one isn't for another 3 hours," she informed me. "Thanks," I replied, already mentally calculating my chances. Hoping the local taxi drivers were reliable, I scribbled my signature on the cash receipt handed to me by another woman. "I'm sorry, I have to cut my stay short," I said with a polite nod. "Please stay with us next time," she responded warmly, giving me a smile that felt completely out of place with everything going on in my head. As I walked toward the exit, memories of my past with Emma hit me like a wave, each one flooding my thoughts as I pushed the door open. Shaking off the emotions, I spotted a taxi in the nearby parking lot and made a beeline for it. I slid into the back seat and, without missing a beat, said, "I bet you $50 you can get me to the airport in under 30 minutes. The driver grinned and replied, "You got it, boss," snapping me back to reality. He was good, really good, weaving through traffic like a pro. He had me at the airport in just 20 minutes. I paid the fare, added a little extra for his skill, and thanked him before rushing toward the entrance. As I made my way through security, I realized I had nothing to worry about. I still had a few minutes to spare. Unlike the last time I flew, I didn't need music to keep my mind occupied. Instead, I stood there, letting the distractions around me keep my thoughts from spiraling. Then, out of nowhere, a funny memory surfaced, and I had to suppress a laugh. Emma's mother, Nancy, never liked me. From the start, she had me pegged as someone who wasn't good enough for her daughter. I remembered how she treated her own husband, Tom, like he was beneath her, like his opinions didn't matter. It always rubbed me the wrong way, and I made sure she knew I wasn't going to let her treat me the same way. Once, she even had the audacity to accuse me of cheating on Emma. She said she caught me glancing at other women when we were out together. I hadn't thought much of it back then, but now, standing there waiting for my flight, the irony hit me like a punch to the gut. Here I was the faithful one, while Emma had clearly made her choices. Throughout the entire flight, doubts gnawed at me, eating away at my thoughts. I pulled out the photo I always carried with me, one of Emma and me, and stared at it, trying to find something familiar in her face. But suddenly, the person standing beside her in that photo, the person who was me, felt like a stranger. I glanced around to make sure no one noticed my inner turmoil, then looked back at the picture. In it, we stood side by side, but what caught my eye now was the way she gazed at me. Or maybe it wasn't me she was seeing. It was a look that now made me question everything. Men are said to have bad memories, but I never considered myself one of those men. Emma, like most women, loved to test that. She'd ask me, "Do you remember this? Or do you remember that?" Unfortunately for her, I remembered everything. Every conversation, every promise, and all the secrets we whispered to each other in the dark. Sitting there now, I couldn't help but wonder how I'd missed the signs these last 2 months. How could this have gone unnoticed? What else had I been blind to? She told me that this guy had shown interest from the first week they met, but she claimed she rejected his advances because she was maintaining appearances due to being married. Now, the thought of them being together was gnawing at me, a sickening feeling that wouldn't let go. I began formulating a plan in my head, and it came to me in 2 parts. First, I'd go home, pack up all of Emma's things, and take them straight to her mother's. I knew that woman would somehow twist the story to blame me, but I didn't care. The truth was all I wanted, and I was ready to face it head on. When the plane landed and we finally arrived at the airport, I felt like everything in my life was unraveling. I didn't waste any time, headed straight to my car, and joined the line to exit the parking lot. The drive home felt like a blur, a haze of thoughts and emotions. I couldn't even remember the details of the trip, but it didn't matter. Time had become irrelevant. What mattered was getting home and doing what needed to be done. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house loomed in front of me, feeling strangely unfamiliar. It was as if the life I knew was already slipping away. I stepped inside, and the dim light only added to the eerie sensation that this place, this home, was no longer mine. I knew I'd have to get used to this emptiness as my new reality. I dropped my bag by the door and made my way to the kitchen, moving automatically. On the way, I turned on the answering machine without thinking. The familiar beep was followed by a voice, Emma's voice, filled with desperation. "Luke, please don't do anything rash. I'm on my way home to talk. Please wait until I get there." Her voice sounded strained, raw with emotion. For a second, I almost let myself believe she was sincere, but I couldn't. Not anymore. I felt like she deserved whatever consequences were coming. Yet hearing that voice, so familiar, so pleading, set something off inside me. I didn't want to hear it. Not like this. In an impulsive moment of frustration, I slammed my fist down hard on the counter, the sound echoing through the empty house. The pain that shot through my hand was nothing compared to the ache twisting in my chest. My actions might have been impulsive, but I needed to take control and prevent myself from making any foolish decisions. There was no chance I'd get any sleep that night, so I went to the garage and dug out all the suitcases Emma had collected over the years. I pulled out a large black suitcase and a bag for her clothes, setting them aside. The rest of the luggage I dragged up to the bedroom. As I sifted through her closet, I grabbed a few of her clothes, some that she wore often, others that I figured she might want, and tossed them into one of the larger bags. I repeated the process several times until her closet started looking emptier. I turned to her dresser next, though I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her underwear actually tucked away in there. For a brief second, the absurd thought of getting hot dogs crossed my mind, like some ridiculous urge to distract myself from the reality of the situation. Instead, I went with a different plan. I didn't want to deal with her mother or anyone else, so I decided to handle things myself. I even thought about making a quick trip to the hardware store to buy some locks, just to busy myself, but I knew I couldn't just leave her stuff scattered around the house. Before I could talk myself out of it, I loaded everything into the car and drove to her mom's house. The drive was uneventful, though I took it slowly, not wanting to rush. When I arrived, I carefully unloaded everything near the garage, not wanting to burden Tom, her dad, with any extra work. I knew her mother and Emma would be of no help to him, like always. As I dropped the third box onto the ground, her mother, Deborah, came out from the house. "Hi, Luke," she called out, her voice tinged with confusion. "What's all this? What's going on?" I straightened up, meeting her puzzled gaze. "Well, when Emma arrives, she might need her clothes. I thought maybe she'd bring them herself, but I couldn't wait any longer." They were cluttering up the front room. Her expression changed, her face growing pale. "What do you mean when Emma arrives?" she asked, a tremor in her voice. "I thought she wasn't in town yet. Why are her things here?" I let out a sigh, trying to choose my words carefully. "Deborah, I'm not entirely sure how she's planning to handle things, but I assume she might stay with you for a while. Then again, she could be thinking about moving in with the person she's been spending time with. I really don't know. That's why I brought her stuff over." Her face turned even whiter, and I could see the shock settling in. "What are you implying?" she asked, her voice shaking. "How can you accuse my daughter of something like that? She had to stay out of town for work. She would never cheat on you." Her voice wavered, and I could sense the hysteria building. "I saw them together last time. They looked happy." I stared at her, wondering if she really believed that, or if she just couldn't face the truth. Either way, I wasn't about to engage in a back and forth about what her daughter was capable of. I'd already seen enough. They were joyfully celebrating their 2-month anniversary at a lively nightclub near their hotel. Meanwhile, I had repeatedly asked Emma to come home for our anniversary, but she regretfully declined, saying she couldn't make it. Determined not to spend our special day apart, I hopped on a plane to surprise her, hoping to salvage what was left of our marriage. But when I arrived, what I found wasn't the reunion I imagined. Instead, they were having an intimate dinner, and the atmosphere between them was unmistakably romantic. I didn't want to intrude, not right away. Watching them exchange tender kisses across the table, I realized I needed time to process what was happening. When they passed me in the hotel lobby later, I thought about saying anything, but then Emma turned to him, whispering in his ear, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity one hadn't seen in years. In that moment, I couldn't bring myself to disrupt them. Instead, I stepped outside for fresh air, trying to clear my head. To my surprise, they left the hotel soon after and headed to a nearby nightclub. I followed at a distance, sitting at a table close enough to overhear their conversation. That's when I heard her say she didn't want to leave him on their 2-month anniversary. He smiled and corrected her, telling her it was actually their 3rd month together. That realization hit me hard, and I knew I couldn't just sit there anymore. If I wanted to reclaim any sense of dignity, I'd have to intervene. But instead of making a scene, I stayed inconspicuous, watching, waiting for the right moment. Still, a part of me felt I needed something concrete. Evidence. After 10 years of sobriety, I took my first sip of alcohol. The irony wasn't lost on me. 10 years ago, Emma had been so concerned about my drinking, convinced it would ruin our marriage. I quit for her. But now, sitting there watching her with another man, I couldn't help but feel like the sacrifice had been in vain. At some point in my days, I took off my wedding ring and left it on the table. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time, giving each of them something to remember me by. But honestly, as I watched the way she looked at him, it became clear that he'd given her something far more valuable than what I ever could. I sat there, waiting for her to return, knowing a confrontation was inevitable. I could already picture her showing up at my doorstep, seeking some sort of refuge after things inevitably blew up in her face. The thought filled me with a twisted sense of satisfaction, and I even stated it aloud to myself, almost as if preparing for the moment. When I later told her mother, Deborah, what had happened, the shock on her face was undeniable. "You're lying," she spat at me, her voice trembling with disbelief. "How can you say such things about your wife? Someone you've been with for 11 years. She's told me everything. She's deeply troubled by all of this." I met her gaze, my voice cold and resolute. "I'll never refer to that woman as my wife again," I said. "You might feel obligated to support her because she's your daughter, but I have no such obligation anymore." And with that, the weight of those words settled in, marking the end of what once was. I saw it all firsthand. And for the last 2 months, I've been living alone while she's been living with him since he started at the company. It's astonishing, really, how much she's changed, especially considering the values you raised her with. For 3 months, She looked me in the eye every single day, lying through her teeth without a shred of remorse. If you think for 1 second that I'm going to let her back into my home, then you're more naive than she is. But it's your choice what to believe, Deborah. That's your problem, not mine. Personally, I've decided to cut my losses. It's obvious she's developed strong feelings for this guy. And honestly, he's welcome to her. At least now, she won't have to sneak around and pretend anymore. Once she's finished with her charades, I'll point her right back here. Then maybe you'll finally see who's been lying. As I placed the last box down, I gave her a final instruction. If she calls, feel free to tell her whatever you want. Let her know I'm looking forward to seeing how she handles this mess. With that, I got into my car and drove away, a storm of emotions brewing inside me. Restless and unable to calm down, I wandered around the house for hours, eventually ending up in the garage. I threw together a small, makeshift workspace in the corner, more out of a need to distract myself than anything else. But my thoughts were soon interrupted by the sudden sound of the doorbell. Curiosity got the best of me. I headed to the door, opening it cautiously, and instinctively stepped back when I saw her, Emma. She stepped inside without saying a word, and in that moment, I realized I had forgotten I was still in the garage. "You must have been in the garage," she commented, closing the door behind her. "I knocked, but you didn't hear me. I was just cleaning up," I said flatly, glancing around at the clutter in the room. Emma sighed, then spoke again. "Well, Mom already called me. I guess you've made up your mind about what to do with me." She looked at me, and I could see a mixture of sadness and disappointment on her face, but it wasn't enough to sway me. "What did you expect, Emma? That I'd just be fine with you having an affair?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. She hesitated before responding. I guess I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't being rational. Her words only deepened my disappointment. "It's a shame," I said quietly, "because all I've been doing is thinking." The silence that followed was thick with everything unsaid, both of us knowing that no apology or excuse could fix the damage that had been done. You see, there was no one around to distract me from my thoughts. The silence in my life only amplified everything. I missed the simple things, having someone to go out to dinner with, visiting a club together, enjoying the dark corners where we could whisper and kiss. But instead, I was left with the reality of a woman who could deceive me without hesitation. She could share my house, my food, my life, and still be close with someone else. Not exactly the kind of image you want to carry around, right? "Are you really ready to throw away 11 years of our life together?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What is it, Luke? Did you even ask me how I felt about it? Would it have bothered you more if I had a real relationship with someone else instead of just playing games?" I couldn't believe she was trying to turn this around. "Does it matter anymore, Emma? Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't. Now you and the guy, whose name I can't even bother to remember, can move on freely without worrying about me. No more tough decisions about who to spend our anniversaries with." I sank into a chair, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. "I think I understand where you're coming from," Emma replied quietly, her voice uncertain. "Do you really, Emma?" I asked, staring her down. "Because I have serious doubts. To you, it was just an act of infidelity, something you probably justified in your own mind, maybe even blaming me for it. Is that what happened? Did my actions somehow push you into his arms?" She looked down, her voice soft as she replied, "No, I don't blame you for this. It just happened." I scoffed. "It just happened? Having an affair for 2 months isn't something that just happens. It takes effort, Emma. Secrecy. And to keep it going, that takes even more effort. So don't downplay it. You've been playing your part well. I'll give you that." My voice softened, but the sting in my words didn't lessen. I loved you completely and unconditionally. And here you are, finding time for this game, laughing behind my back, sharing intimate moments with someone else. I can't even imagine what that must feel like for you, to be sneaking around, joking about cheating on me. And that tearful phone call last night? That was a real performance, Emma. Maybe you've got a future in acting. You certainly fooled me." She looked up, her eyes filled with regret, but the damage was already done. There was nothing she could say that would change what she'd become in my eyes. "Your performance could easily outshine the last 3 Oscar winners," I said, my voice thick with sarcasm. I had a brief moment where I couldn't help but laugh, an uncontrollable outburst that caught me off guard before I stifled it. I wasn't sure where it came from, but one thing was clear. If this was how you treated someone you claimed to love, then I wanted no part of that love. If that's your idea of love, Emma, please spare me the anger. She protested, indignant. How can you believe I don't love you after 11 years? I leaned forward, my tone serious. Listen, Emma, since you like asking questions, let me ask you one. Imagine I found out you had an intimate relationship with another man. But let's say it was a one-time thing, not a drawn-out affair. How do you think I'd react? She paused before replying, her voice softer now. To be honest, I think you would have asked me to leave and started divorce proceedings. I nodded, appreciating her honesty. That's exactly what I thought you'd say. I even imagined you throwing something at me, for good measure. But who knows? I mused aloud, half expecting a sharp retort, but instead, she gave a faint smile. Now, imagine this, Emma, I continued. For nearly 3 months, every day we spent together meant nothing to me. It was all just an act, a facade to make you think our relationship was fine, while my heart was somewhere else. Imagine me spending entire days with another woman, coming home to you with a smile, lying to your face. Do you think you could believe I still loved you after all that time? Show me some confidence, Emma, I said, my voice firm. Because the way you're acting, it's like you don't even care about what's happening. She took a deep breath. The time we spent together was valuable to me. It wasn't just casual conversation. I genuinely enjoyed being with you, she insisted, but there was a hollowness to her words now. Do you even remember the last time we were close, Emma? When was the last time you initiated one of those affectionate kisses? When did you last act like my wife? I asked, my frustration spilling over. After what I've seen and heard, it's hard for me to stand here and believe you still love me. I'm not naive. I overheard you and that gossip Sue talking about him the moment he joined your office. And then, to top it off, you two were laughing about getting her a gift for bringing you two together. I leaned back in my chair, the exhaustion from it all hitting me at once. Seems like you've already found your next bridesmaid. All that's left is to pick his best man and plan the wedding banquet, right? Emma shifted uncomfortably. So, I guess that makes me like you, huh? Should I expect a server to show up at my doorstep? She asked, almost defensively. I shook my head, unamused. What is it, Emma? What do you want? She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. First and foremost, I need to know where I'm going to live. That's the thing, Emma. That's not my problem anymore. You figure it out. You're kicking me out? And keeping everything for yourself? After 11 years, that seems unfair, she said, her voice soft but filled with disbelief. Unfair? I replied, shaking my head. It always comes down to making a deal with you, doesn't it? Well, this deal's done. If you want a house, you're going to have to pay for it. As for me, I'm keeping this one. I've fallen in love with it. And with the extra space, I can finally make it into the home I've always wanted. I figured you and your new guy had already found a place. His name is Jake, she corrected, but I just shrugged. I couldn't care less about that. Really, Emma? Do you honestly think he has nowhere to live? I asked, arching an eyebrow. Of course he does, she shot back. Well then, problem solved, I said, watching her face. But something tells me his wife isn't too keen on this arrangement, is she? Her expression shifted, and she froze for a second. Wait, how do you know about that? Did you find out he's married? She asked, her tone growing serious. You really think I'm that naive? I replied. Why do you think you're standing here, Emma? So what's the deal? He's not going to leave his wife for you, is he? Is that why you came back here? She didn't answer, and I pressed on. Look, I've thought about this a lot. Sure, 11 years is a long time. But after everything, I've realized we're done. This was your choice, Emma. Let's not forget those amazing 2 or 3 months you had with him. And here's hoping you have even more in the future. I paused for a moment, then added, when I gave you back that ring, it wasn't just a gesture. It meant the end. So don't throw our 11 years together at me now. They didn't matter to you then, and they sure as hell don't matter to me anymore. I'll make up for those years with the legal documents once they're ready. The house offer stands. If you want to come back and take whatever you need, feel free. I crossed my arms and finished. But let's be clear, Emma. Divorce me and go your own way. You might be hoping for some kind of sympathy, but I'm done. I can't trust you anymore, not under this roof, not ever again. No, I have no desire to keep this house, she replied, pulling her hand out of her pocket. Give me a few days to find a new place, and I'll probably take some of the furniture with me. She hesitated for a moment, then held out the ring. What should I do with this? I glanced at the ring and shrugged. Do whatever you want with it. Actually, I've got an idea. Why not wear it as a toe ring? It'd probably fit perfectly, considering how you've walked all over our marriage. I smirked, feeling the sting in my own words. Or hey, maybe I could find a use for it myself. Okay, you know what? She shot back, her voice sharper now. Maybe I'll pawn it. Could use the extra cash. I chuckled. You won't get much for it. They buy these things by weight. What? Maybe $1.30? Not even enough for a cheap ring, but it's yours, so do whatever pleases you. I turned toward the door, signaling the end of the conversation. Did you get all my stuff out of the closet? She asked, her tone softening. Yeah, I got everything, I replied, my voice flat. Though I have to admit, I wasn't exactly gentle with the packing. I just tossed everything in. Hope your clothes survive the trip without too many wrinkles. She frowned a little. Mind if I take a look? Go ahead. You know where everything is, I said, watching her as she headed upstairs. I could hear her moving through the bedroom, the closet, and then the bathroom. A few minutes later, she came back down, packing a few stray cosmetics into a small floral bag. You were pretty thorough, she said with a forced smile. Just missed a couple of things. I might have to call you when it's time to move. I returned her smile, equally forced. Of course, happy to help, just as long as it's not too close to me, I said, moving to open the door for her. Before leaving, she hesitated. Want to go for a walk? I paused, considering her request. Then a mischievous idea popped into my head. Wouldn't it be too much to ask you to run instead? I asked deadpan. She shot me a look. Kiss me right here, right now, she replied, her voice daring. I wouldn't dare kiss someone when I don't know where she's been, I retorted, holding the door open and watching her leave. And with that, the door closed on our communication. 3 months later, I had my lawyer file the divorce papers. On Monday, I had 2 stops on my list. First to pick up the documents from my lawyer, and then to get Emma's signature at her mother's house. The goal was simple. Make it official and ensure there were no lingering hopes of reconciliation. I parked outside her mother's house, sat there for a moment, staring at the familiar facade. I knew that once Emma signed those papers, this long, painful chapter would finally be over. It would take time, but soon enough, I'd find peace in the quiet nights ahead. I got out of the car, walked to the door, and rang the bell. To my surprise, it was my mother-in-law who answered. Well, Luke, what brings you here? What's going on? She asked. I thought you'd forgotten about us already, I replied dryly. Not quite. Is Emma here? Yes, she's here. Come on in, she said, closing the door behind me. A few moments later, Emma walked into the room. I handed her the papers. Emma, I'm here for you to sign these. Once I file them tomorrow, the divorce will be finalized. I just want this over. Emma sighed deeply, her voice heavy with emotion. I don't think I've ever been good enough for you, have I?